Our journey continues here in Jerusalem with a search for the Ark of the Covenant. Legends have placed the Ark in faraway places like Ethiopia or Ireland.
As fascinating as it was, the Ark of the Covenant disappeared from history over 600 years before Christ was born. Since then, many explorers have searched for the ancient relic, but to no avail. That was until recently when scientists claimed to have found and opened an ancient chest at Mount Nebo that looks a lot like how the Bible describes the Ark. Could this be the sacred chest, or is it just another overblown story? Stay until the end as we closely examine the evidence according to the scriptures.
The light of God shines from you, Moses.
Do not kneel to me, Joshua.
Has the Ark been found? Even with the shocking evidence recently given by modern-day scientists, many Christian scholars today believe that the recent discoveries sound too good to be true. After all, from the writing of St. John's Apocalypse in 96 AD up until today, there have been countless stories by explorers and even modern scientists who have claimed to have found the famous Ark of the Covenant.
According to the book of Exodus, the story of the Ark dates back to ancient Egypt in the 13th century BCE.
And that's not all. Some claim that it's hidden somewhere underneath the Jerusalem temple, while others insist that it's hidden in Ethiopia. And even now, there are reports from people who claim to have found and opened the artifact at Mount Nebo. In light of these many claims, one valid question comes to mind. Why do current-day experts and explorers from the 80s both claim to have found the same thing at different times in history? Is this another case of mistaken identity or sensational exaggeration? Or is there more to this than meets the eye? Well, the answer is a bit complicated, so let's first examine what the scriptures have to say. To biblically figure out the truth behind the recent claims, we'll have to delve a little bit into the beautiful story behind this ancient relic. The Ark of the Covenant was a sacred chest built by the Israelites under God's direction. Inside the Ark were three important items: the stone tablets with the famous 10 Commandments inscribed on them, Aaron's rod, and special samples of food from heaven called manna. It was covered with a special lid called the mercy seat with two angels with lathe wings that covered most of the top. The sacred chest as a whole was kept in a special place within the temple called the Holy of Holies, a place so sacred that only one person could enter. This person was known as the high priest, and he was only allowed to enter once a year. Why was this ark so sacred? Because it was a symbol of God's physical presence as their invisible king. Beyond that, this sacred chest also played a very important role in biblical history. The last time the ark was mentioned in the scriptures was during the reign of the 16th king of Judah. This great monarch was King Josiah, and he asked a special group of people to take the sacred chest into the temple after it had been removed for safekeeping. This special group of people were the Levites, and no one outside their tribe was allowed to touch or even move the ark, and everyone who disobeyed this command died on the spot. After the Levites obeyed King Josiah's command, the ark was never mentioned again, and the only hint we have in the Bible was what happened after King Nebuchadnezzar, a powerful king from Babylon, destroyed the sacred temple and took away as many sacred items as his men could find. Now this is where it gets interesting. The sacred text lists the treasures stolen by King Nebuchadnezzar, including the expensive gold vessels and the beautiful menorah. But nowhere in the text does it mention the Ark of the Covenant. So what happened to the sacred chest? Let's dig a little deeper. According to an apocryphal book of the Bible known as the Second Scroll of Maccabees, the prophet Jeremiah was helped by a few young Levites to hide the ark in an old cave located in present-day Jordan. Right there in Mount Nebo, the prophet Jeremiah sealed the ark and declared that nobody would be able to find it until God decided that it was time. How was it moved away from the large and open temple at a time when King Nebuchadnezzar's men were destroying the city? Thankfully, the full answer to this question was discovered in 2019 by two explorers from Israel. One explorer was Barak Monekindam Gevin, and the other was Tehillah Sadiel. These partners were studying the relics that were dug up recently along Jerusalem's western wall when they found the impossible. Carved into the bedrock beneath the western wall were underground tunnels and chambers with features that go at least 2,000 years into the past. Better yet, these secret chambers stand as the perfect explanation for how the prophet Jeremiah could have pulled this off. According to the scriptures, particularly in the book of Jeremiah chapter 40, when Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 586 BC, in this chapter, the prophet Jeremiah was found as a prisoner within the city and freed by Babylon's general Nebuzaradan, with the choice to either come to Babylon or stay in the burning city. Jeremiah chose to stay, and right there on the spot, the general assigned him to be in charge of those left behind in the crumbling city. While this happened, the vast majority of men, women, and children were led away as captives from the crumbling inferno. As far as Jeremiah was concerned, this meant he now had the rights over everything that was possibly left behind by the Babylonians, including the Ark of the Covenant. It's most likely the case because the Ark wasn't listed as one of the things stolen when the temple was destroyed. With this in mind, it is most likely true that Jeremiah, now having legal authority over major parts of the land and an inherent passion for all things holy, was moved by the power of God to remove the Ark away from the temple to a place where the pagan soldiers wouldn't desecrate it. He likely moved it away from the temple through the same secret underground pathways discovered by Barak Monachindam Given and Tehillah Sadiel in 2019, and it all begins to make sense. Through these underground pathways, the prophet Jeremiah and the few Levites with him could have moved the Ark out of Jerusalem to the secret location in Mount Nebo. Somewhere at the mountain, the sacred chest was sealed by Jeremiah and prophesied to be unveiled on the day God plans to do so. Many find this explanation believable, especially considering the recent discovery that aligns almost perfectly with this account at the same location.
Joint project to the Israeli Antiquities Authority and the Western Wall Heritage Foundation.
A handful of Jews, however, believe that the Ark of the Covenant is somewhere within those pathways. But before we delve into that, interestingly enough, there was a much bigger explanation, one that sent shockwaves through the Christian community. Deep in the northern parts of Ethiopia are people known from a sacred ancestry known as the Solomonic dynasty, or the House of Solomon. They claim to have the Ark of the Covenant and trace their history back to the wise and wealthy King Solomon of Israel. He ruled over 9 centuries before Christ and was so wise that an African queen traveled from Ethiopia for several miles to Israel just to hear his wisdom. According to Ethiopian tradition, this queen from Sheba was named Makeda, and she stayed in Jerusalem for a short while. During this time, they became close friends and later fell in love. In less than a year, Queen Makeda had a son with him, and his name was Menelik. When it was time to return home, Queen Makeda returned with Menelik to Ethiopia, where he grew into a man. After growing up, he returned to Israel to visit his father. According to Ethiopian tradition, when Solomon met Menelik, he welcomed the young man and even offered him a portion of Israel as an inheritance. Some sources even claim that he was offered the throne, but Menelik refused and agreed to only go back with written wisdom from Solomon and a handful of his greatest treasures. Now the story gets a bit strange. To this day, there are Ethiopian legends implying that the Ark of the Covenant was one of those treasures given to him by Solomon. On top of that, they believe it was brought into Ethiopia and hidden somewhere at a church in Axum City, a region in the northern part of the country. Only a few priests are allowed to see it, and the Ark is treated as so holy that no one else is allowed to even look at it, let alone try to move it. This, of course, goes against the scriptures, which tell us that the Ark was still in the Jewish temple hundreds of years after Solomon's death. Despite this, Ethiopian priests continue to guard the object, and they do it so well that no one outside the order has seen it. It also doesn't make a lot of sense when we consider the nature of the Ark according to the first books of the Bible. These books were written long before Solomon was king and were held to the same standard as every other book in our Bibles today. These books, particularly the book of Exodus, tell us that anyone who isn't a Levite isn't permitted to move the Ark. Worse yet, those who tried to do so were killed on the spot. A great example of this was a man who lived before Solomon named Uzzah. He wasn't from the tribe of Levi, but he tried to move the Ark without God's permission. He was struck down immediately, and his story was recorded in the history books found in our Bibles, and was likely read by Solomon multiple times before the Queen of Sheba came to visit. The king was well aware of the dangers that came with disregarding the sacred chest. With this in mind, it's highly unlikely that Solomon, as wise as he was, would have allowed his beloved son to leave with a sacred object that could potentially end his life. And it's even less likely that the people would allow the Ark to be moved out of their home so easily. It was the only visible sign of God's presence in their land. Without it, there was no tangible proof that they were God's people, at least for the time. Inside the Ark were also precious relics that simply couldn't be taken away from Israel. The 2 tablet stones with the 10 Commandments inscribed on them, Aaron's budded rod with flowers, and a sample of the special food they ate in the desert called manna. With that out of the way, multiple valid questions come to mind the more we think about the recent discovery. Why were these sacred items stored in the ark? Why were only a few people allowed to touch it? And why would scientists today suddenly have permission to open it? Now prepare yourself, because you are in for a big surprise. What if scientists open it? Each of the holy items stored in the ark had a special meaning. Each meaning made the sacred items far too precious to have been hidden so casually. In Exodus 25, Moses was told by God to put the 10 Commandments into the ark, and this was mentioned again in Deuteronomy 10, where the prophet is described as obeying that instruction. Why was he instructed to do this? Because the rules inscribed into those stone tablets were the agreement made by God with his people. It was like a contract written down to show that he would always bless them if they obeyed what was written there, and punish them if they didn't. By putting the tablets into the ark, Moses and everyone were putting the rules at the heart of everything they believed. They had now put these laws on the same sacred level as God's presence with them, which meant disobeying these laws was the same as defying their Creator. Hebrews 9 tells us that the 10 Commandments weren't the only thing stored there, but also a golden plate of manna and Aaron's flowering rod. Manna was a special food that God sent from heaven during difficult times in the desert to keep his people from going hungry. It was like bread, but tasted a lot like wafers made with honey. Moses took a handful of this food and stored them in a golden pot. Keeping the pot in the ark showed that it is deep in the heart of God to always provide, and the people trusted him to keep doing that as long as they obeyed the laws that were also stored in the ark. Some of us might recall the story of Aaron's flowering rod. It happened 3,500 years ago, during one hot afternoon in the Sinai desert. There was a hot argument about who should be Israel's temple leader. To settle the argument, God made Aaron's rod grow flowers and almonds, even though it was just a dry piece of wood that hadn't been planted. It showed that God chose Aaron to be their leader, and by putting the rod in the ark, it showed that the people would always trust God in choosing their leaders from that moment on. On a broader scale, it reminded the Israelites that God can always be trusted in making difficult decisions. With these three things inside the open box, the sacred chest was covered by a golden lid with two golden angels on top having wide spreading wings reaching each other and covering most of the surface. This was called the mercy seat, but it came with a twist. You see, this part of the ark was so important because it is the literal place where God's presence would appear whenever the high priest entered the most holy place once every year. He doesn't come empty-handed, but carries a bowl of blood from a lamb slaughtered outside. When the high priest gets there, he would sprinkle the blood of the sacrificed animal on the mercy seat where God's presence is. The blood in this custom stood for the forgiveness of sins, and by doing this, the people were asking for God's mercy as the price for their mistakes was sprinkled on the surface by the high priest. By the mercy seat being above the law, the food and the rod, it was a reminder to the high priest and everyone in the land that everything was based on God's love and forgiveness alone, and not just by trying to be good and acceptable. With so much importance attached to each part of the Ark of the Covenant, it is no wonder people weren't allowed to touch it, and the only ones allowed to do so were a special tribe of people in Israel called the Levites. And guess what? Even they were not allowed to touch the Ark, but to carry it along with wooden poles attached to both sides of the sacred chest. With that in mind, what do you think would happen when a group of Western scientists try to get their hands on the Ark and open it today? The horrors would be too hard to imagine. But let's think about it based on what the Bible says about those who were allowed to move the Ark, the Levites. What made them so special? And why were they chosen among the 12 tribes to do this work? Well, the answer might not be what you think it is. Who can touch the Ark? Well, according to the scriptures, the Levites were chosen because they were the people who devoted themselves to carrying out God's judgment. This happened when Moses went up Mount Sinai for 40 days to receive the 10 Commandments and came back only to find his people worshiping something that was insulting to God, the golden calf. God wanted to get rid of those who never wanted to worship him from the start, and through Moses, he called out for people among Israelites who were willing to get the job done. The only group of people who wanted to do it were the Levites, and through their help, up to 3,000 enemies of God were removed from the Israelites that day. This happened in Exodus chapter 32, and it was one of the bloodiest days in ancient Israel's history. For doing this difficult work, God rewarded them with the right not only to move and take care of the ark, but also to work and look after the temple. And each of these roles was separated according to the different families within the tribe. The family responsible for taking care of the ark was the Kohathite family, and it was the most exciting yet terrifying job imaginable. Each time the altar was moved, it was covered with a special cloth to keep it unseen from too many people. And as the 4 priests moved it, the ark was hoisted up and resting on their shoulders. They weren't allowed to carry it like other things, and neither were they allowed to move it on a cart either pushed by men or carried by animals. Instead, by doing the hard work of carrying it on their shoulders, it showed their great respect for their agreement with God and His presence among the people. But as risky as it was, looking after the ark also came with lots of benefits as well. The Bible mentions the story of a man named Obed-Edom who chose to look after the Ark of the Covenant with great respect. More importantly, he did it at a time when all the Israelites, including the Levites, were afraid of having the sacred chest anywhere near them. One man named Uzzah was struck down by God just because he tried to hold the ark with his hands to prevent it from falling to the ground. While King David was angry and the people were afraid, Obed-Edom welcomed the ark into his home and looked after it as if he were a Levite. He did this for 3 months, and by the final week, he was so rich and famous that King David had to put aside his anger and bring the ark into the temple so the entire nation could prosper as well. On top of that, everyone from the other tribes was instructed by God to give about 10% of their resources to the Levites without asking for anything else in return. Unlike other people in Israel, the Levites never toiled in the local farms to earn a living, as God always provided through the people's tithes and offerings. With this in mind, it is safe to say that according to the scriptures, modern-day scientists and archaeologists who aren't from the tribe of Levi would already have too much trouble touching the ark, let alone opening it. Worse yet, finding and opening the ark might bring up real issues for the truth and validity of the New Testament. This is because many scholars and Bible teachers believe that the meaning and purpose of the sacred chest, according to the book of Hebrews, has already been fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Finding and opening it today would not only go against what the book says, but would wipe out almost 2,000 years of Christian belief about who Jesus said He was according to the scriptures. How so, you may ask? Let's examine what the text says. First off, in Luke chapter 24, when Jesus appeared to His disciples on the road to Emmaus and the others not long after. The Gospel of Luke says that everything in the Old Testament, from the sacred laws and strange prophecies to the stories of the greatest heroes and legends of the old era, all point to Christ, and He showed all of it to His disciples in that upper room after He was resurrected. Many Christian scholars agree with this, including Dr. William Lane Cragen, Dr. John MacArthur. They both believe that Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of the ark's existence, according to Hebrews 9. This implies that the ark is no longer necessary as long as Christ is held to the same standard as the sacred chest was in the Old Testament. The law was written on the stone tablets as God's standard for holiness, but humans could never live up to that standard, even with that blood sprinkled every year by the high priest. He fulfilled the role of the law stored inside the sacred chest by living a perfect life. If what the New Testament says is true, then Jesus lived without breaking one of these laws as long as He lived, and everyone who accepts and believes in His sacrifice would be just as perfect as He is, as far as God is concerned. Scholars also point to the pot of manna stored in the ark as another thing that was fulfilled in the life of Christ. According to them, Jesus fulfilled that by calling Himself the bread of life, implying He is the one sent from heaven to give lasting nourishment to the soul, just as the food called manna fell from heaven as nourishment to their stomachs. Jesus called Himself the fulfillment of that event by referring to Himself as the new bread of life. The big difference is that while manna satisfied the hunger of the ancient Israelites for a few hours, His teachings would satisfy the needs of the human soul for all eternity. For almost 2,000 years, leading church fathers have taught and believed that Aaron's flowering rod stands for the ability to bring life from dead things. Jesus fulfills this by bringing new life from within everyone who puts their trust in Him for His grace to lead a new life. He said in John chapter 4 that it is what He came to do, to bring forth life-giving water from a dry source with the hearts of men. While Aaron's rod brought a sign of life, Jesus came to be life unto everyone, and those who accept this would be living springs of life for others to drink and also become sources of true life as well. The ark was hidden away in the Holy of Holies and was only seen by the high priest once every year. But now Christ lives with his followers every day through his Holy Spirit. He is Emmanuel, which means God with us. But as wonderful as this sounds to believers, all that would crumble to the dust of the Ark of the Covenant gets found today. Finding the Ark today means Christ hasn't fulfilled its purpose for existing. And worse yet, opening the sacred chest means that God's presence has lost its power. Not even the Levites, who had the right to move and look after the Ark, would even dare do such a thing. On top of that, even if it were found today with the same power it had in the scriptures, there would be serious problems with it. 1. It would take the focus away from Christ to the object. It's perhaps the same reason why Moses' body was secretly buried by God and hasn't been found today. His body was so sacred that even Lucifer and Michael the archangel fought about who would look after the corpse not long after he was buried. This happened in Jude 1 verse 9, and it was likely because the body had so much power that it might have caused the people to start focusing too much on it rather than worshiping their Creator. This is why many scholars are hesitant to believe the recent stories of finding the Ark of the Covenant, and they believe finding it is neither true nor helpful to keep pointing people to things like this. With that said, there is one last account of the sacred chest in history, and what it entails is nothing short of breathtaking. Another theory to consider. This theory comes from the famous Dead Sea Scrolls.
7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts.
It was found in 1953 deep inside a cave near Qumran, and it was very different from the other ancient scrolls that they had found. This one was not fragile or falling apart like the others, but was made of metal. It was a copper scroll, yet it was rolled up and hidden for centuries. How was it easily rolled up if it was made of ancient metal? Well, the answer is that it wasn't, or at least not in the way you might think. You see, the copper scroll is also made up of tin, albeit just over 1%. And this enabled the ancient experts to hammer the copper into thin and flexible sheets. Then they inscribed the text before rolling it back into a scroll and storing it for later use. When it was discovered, it didn't look so good because the metal had corroded and made the scroll almost impossible to unroll without breaking it. After a long time of trying to figure out how to unroll the artifact, the experts in 1955 gave up by deciding to cut the scroll in half to reveal the text. Then it was split even further into 23 strips. Each of these parts looked like a half cylinder, and while the other resources at the cave contained religious texts found in the Bible, this one looked a lot more like a treasure map. It listed various places that were filled with gold, silver, and sacred objects. Scholars believe the treasure belonged to the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. It gets interesting when we notice the sacred items that were also listed as treasures. These treasures were hidden in various places, and they included priestly garments, incense, spices, good bars, and talents hidden across 64 hidden locations. Many people wonder if the Ark of the Covenant could be among these treasures hidden out there, but wasn't specified because of how sensitive the information was. As intriguing as it sounds, there are also problems with this theory. 1. There is no way the ancient Jews obsessed with signs wouldn't have dropped enough hints for modern Jews to locate the Ark. Secondly, even though it was real, there is no way to find and verify the locations of any of these treasures, as to this day, archaeologists are still hunting for the lost treasures and haven't found any of them. This is especially because most of the places where the sacred gold is hidden do not match any of the real places we have around us today. Because of this, many thought it was all misdirection, hinting that the Ark of the Covenant was hidden somewhere under a cave in that location. But as usual, there is nothing credible that could be used to prove this. After all the excitement, there are too many answers on where the Ark of the Covenant is, and most of them do not add up. Some say it is hidden in one of the tunnels found in 2019, but after 5 years of searching, there is still no clue. Others think it was taken to Ethiopia by the son of King Solomon, but it goes against everything written in the sacred texts about the Ark still being in Jerusalem during the reign of King Josiah. Others believe it's hidden in Qumran, but over 70 years have passed since then, and there has been no clue of finding the sacred chest. For these reasons, Bible scholars and experts claim there is no reason to be excited about recent stories of finding the Ark of the Covenant. If it ever gets found and opened, then that moment would change everything we know about biblical history. Until then, trusted Christian scholars and historians are not looking for the Ark and what's inside, and neither should we. So what do you think? Is Christ the true fulfillment of the sacred chest? Or are Christian scholars just trying their best to hide the truth? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.